Welcome everyone to the very first deck tech of the channel. On this channel we do something a little bit different with our deck decks. We give each commander deck its own performance rating. If you'd like further explanation as to what these ratings mean, please check for a link in the description for a video that goes into further detail. On this channel we like to make cost-effective and budget-friendly decks, with the cost in paper being $39.19, and if you wish to play this on Magic Online, $12.56. This cost includes each card in the deck, including the commanders, but it does not include basic lands. And if you're ordering in paper, shipping is also included. To get started, let's introduce the two commanders for this deck, Ardenn, Intrepid Archaeologist, and Anara, Wolved Familiar. Ardenn, Intrepid Archaeologist, he's a 2/2 for 2 generic and 1 white with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may attach any number of auras and equipment that you control to target permanent or player. This allows us to bypass any equip cost, no matter how substantial. Anara, Wolved Familiar, she's a 4/4 for 3 generic and 1 green that gives our commanders indestructible so long as it's our turn. This allows us to use board wipes proactively to not just set our opponent's back, but also clear the board of blockers. Board wipes usually leave the caster tapped out, without creatures of their own, and completely exposed. Anara lets us use board wipes and reap all the benefits without as many drawbacks. With their powers combined, we'll use Ardenn, equipments, and auras to build up a tall commander, and with the mana freed up from not having to pay any of the equip costs, we'll cast Anara and board wipes and other removal to clear the way for an attack, with the ultimate goal of winning with 21 commander damage. Now let's talk about the cards in the deck that are going to make this all happen. We'll break up the entire deck list into different categories, so to start us off, let's talk about the cards with ramp function. First off, we have Blighted Woodland and Crowsand Verge. Both are lands that will tap for colorless mana, but Blighted Woodland you can pay 3 generic, 1 green, tap and sacrifice it to search our library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them into the battlefield tapped. Crowsand Verge, on the other hand, enters play tapped, but we can pay 2 generic, tap it and sacrifice it to search our library for a forest card and a plains card. Just like high school, Crowsand Verge doesn't care if they're basic, which means we can search up 2 lands that have a forest type and a plains type. So we've included in the land base lands that have those types that come into play tapped anyways, with the exception of Canopy Vista, which could come into play untapped, but these are all prime targets for Crowsand Verge. Next we have Rampant Growth, Sakura Tribe Elder, and Edge of Autumn. Each cost 1 generic and 1 green, and can search our library for a basic land card and put it into play tapped. However, Edge of Autumn is a little bit different because if we control 5 or more lands, we can't search our library for a basic land card. However, we can use Edge of Autumn by discarding it and sacrificing a land to draw a card. Up next we have Farseek and Search for Tomorrow. Farseek costs 1 generic and 1 green, whereas Search for Tomorrow costs 2 generic and 1 green. In our deck, Farseek can only search up a land that has a plains type, which means we can search up a basic plains or the lands we mentioned earlier when talking about Crowsand Verge. Search for Tomorrow, on the other hand, can search us a basic land of either type and put it directly into play untapped. We can also suspend this for 2 turns with 1 mana, which is a great turn 1 play. Up next we have cards that give us draw function, so to start off we have Eye of Vecna, Colossal Majesty, and Glorious Sunrise. Each of these will trigger during 1 point in our turn and may allow us to draw us a card. So to go into a little bit more detail, Eye of Vecna, which costs 2 generic mana, will draw us a card and lose us 2 life when it enters play, but at the beginning of our upkeep we may pay 2 generic mana. If we do, we draw a card and again lose 2 life. Colossal Majesty, which costs 2 generic and 1 green, doesn't have an enter the battlefield effect, but at the beginning of our upkeep, if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, we draw a card. And then Glorious Sunrise, which costs 3 generic and 2 green, will draw us a card at the beginning of our combat. We can also use some of the other functions, but we're more concerned with the draw function. Next we have Hunter's Insight and Snake Umbra, each costing 2 generic and 1 green mana. Hunter's Insight is an instant where we cast it on one of our creatures. When it deals combat damage to a player this turn, we draw that many cards. Snake Umbra is an aura that we can attach to one of our creatures, where if it deals damage to an opponent we draw a card, but it also has a protection effect of Totem Armor, where if enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. And to finish off cards with draw function, we have Arch of Araska and Harmonize. Arch of Araska is a land that will tap for colorless mana, but if we have the City's Blessing, we may pay 5 generic, tap it to draw a card. And then Harmonize is a sorcery that costs 2 generic and 2 green, where we draw 3 cards upon resolution. Next, we have a card that I really couldn't decide whether to put it into the draw category or the ramp category. So I figured, why not give it its own? So here is one of my favorite cards in Commander, Bonder's Ornament. Bonder's Ornament is a 3-drop mana rock that can tap for 1 mana of any color. Also, we can pay 4 generic, tap it, and each player who controls a Bonder's Ornament draws a card. Now, I've hardly ever seen anybody else run Bonder's Ornament, and by hardly anybody else, I mean nobody. However, if another player on the table is running a Bonder's Ornament and you activate the draw ability, you and that player draw a card, so that's a good opportunity to make a friend. Up next, we have the bulk of the deck list, which mostly consists of auras and equipment, which we're going to use to build up our commander to get that 21 commander damage. There are also other cards in this section that are not auras and equipment, but they serve a pretty similar function. To start us off in this category, we have Belt of Giant Strength and Colossus Hammer. Belt of Giant Strength is an equipment that costs 1 generic and 1 green, and equipped creature has base power and toughness 10/10. Colossus Hammer, on the other hand, just costs 1 generic mana and gives the creature +10/+10, but that creature loses flying. Though we can probably get by with paying these substantially high equip costs later on in the game, with Ardenn, we don't really need to worry about them. Up next, we have All That Glitters and Blackblade Reforged. Each of these buffs the attached creature incrementally, where All That Glitters is an aura that gives it +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment we control, where Blackblade Reforged is an equipment that'll give the creature +1/+1 for each land we control. Next up, we have Hero's Blade and Seraphic Greatsword. Hero's Blade costs 2 generic mana, is an equipment that gives equipped creature +3/+2, and we get to equip it for free if a legendary creature enters play under our control. Seraphic Greatsword is also an equipment, and it costs 1 generic and 1 white, and gives equipped creature +2/+2, and whenever the equipped creature attacks the player with the most life or tied with the most life, we create a 4/4 angel, tapped and attacking that player. Now, unlike similar effects, we don't lose the angel, so we get to keep it around to make another attack or keep it as a blocker. Next, we have Demon Mail Halberg, which costs 4 generic mana, and Slayer's Plate, which costs 3 generic mana. Both are equipments that give the equipped creature +4/+2, and, well, thanks to Ardenn, we don't have to worry about the equip cost. Following that, we have Argentum Armor and Bone Horde. Argentum Armor costs 6 generic mana and gives the equipped creature +6/+6, and whenever the equipped creature attacks, we destroy target permanent. Bone Horde costs 4 generic mana. It's an equipment with Living Weapon, so when this enters play, we get a 0/0 black germ token and attach Bone Horde to it. Now, the real draw of this equipment is that equipped creature gets +X/+X, where X is the number of creature cards in all graveyards, ours and our opponents'. So since we're running lots of board wipes, we should be able to fill up those graveyards pretty easily with lots of creatures, and therefore give Bone Horde a substantial boost. And before moving on to the next section, we have something that's not an equipment but still buffs our creature. It's Altar of the Goyf, which costs 5 generic mana. Whenever a creature we control attacks alone, it gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of card types among cards in all graveyards. As we just mentioned with Bone Horde, we can fill up the graveyards pretty easily with a bunch of creatures, but as the game goes on, Altar of the Goyf gets more effective with other card types like sorcery, instant, whatever have you. For the next section of the deck list, we're going to talk about attachments and permanents that double our commander's damage. These cards consist of Duelist's Heritage, Inquisitor's Flail, and Fire Shrieker. Duelist's Heritage costs 2 generic and 1 white. It's an enchantment, not an aura, but whenever one or more creatures attack, you may have target attacking creature gain double strike until end of turn. Obviously, we'll be targeting one of our creatures during our own combat, but this triggers each combat, which means during our opponent's attack step, after attackers are declared, we may have target attacking creature gain double strike until end of turn, so we can target a creature that's attacking another one of our opponents. But since the word may is in there, we can also choose not to give it double strike, whichever works to our advantage. Then there's Inquisitor's Flail, which costs 2 generic mana. It's an equipment that says if equipped creature would deal combat damage, it deals double that damage instead, but if another creature would deal combat damage to a equipped creature, it deals double that damage to the equipped creature instead. Now, if we have Anara in play and it's our turn, our commanders have Indestructible and we're not too worried as to how much combat damage is dealt to one of our attacking commanders. And then there's Fire Shrieker, which costs 3 generic mana. It's an equipment that gives equipped creature double strike. So for the next section, we have attachments and permanents that give our creatures evasion. So to start us off, we have Rogue's Passage, Prowler's Helm, and Maul of the Skyclaves. Rogue's Passage is a land that taps for 1 colorless mana, but we may pay 4 generic mana, tap it, target creature is unblockable this turn. Prowler's Helm is an equipment that costs 2 generic mana, and equipped creature cannot be blocked except by walls. There's a fair chance that our opponents aren't going to be running any wall creatures, so this effectively gives equipped creature unblockable. Then there's Maul of the Skyclaves, which costs 2 generic mana and 1 white. It's an equipment that gives equipped creature +2/+2, flying, and first strike. And if we have a creature in play when this lands, we can attach it for free. Next up, we have Forebear's Blade and O Naginata. Both are equipment that give equipped creature +3/+0 and trample. However, Forebear's Blade, which costs 3 generic mana, also gives it vigilance. And if the equipped creature dies, we attach Forebear's Blade to target creature we control. O Naginata, which costs 1 generic mana, is a little bit tricky because it can only be attached to a creature with power 3 or more. This is no problem for an unmodified Anara, however Ardenn is going to need to get a little bit stronger in order for O Naginata to be attached to him. Now we're moving on to the next section, which are attachments that allow our creatures to gain us life. It's pretty much a given that our opponents are going to be swinging at us as much as we're swinging at them, so we need to gain that much life back and keep on going. To start this section off, we have equipments Batterbone, Behemoth Sledge, and Loxodon Warhammer. Batterbone costs 2 generic mana, and when it enters play, we get a 0/0 Germ token and attach Batterbone to it. And Batterbone gives equipped creature +1/+1, vigilance, and lifelink. Again, we're not worried about the really high equip costs, and moving on, we have Behemoth Sledge, which costs 1 generic, 1 green, and 1 white. And Behemoth Sledge gives equipped creature lifelink, trample, and +2/+2. Loxodon Warhammer just costs 3 generic mana, gives equipped creature +3/+0 and trample, and whenever this creature deals damage, we gain that much life. Now, this effect is unique because it will gain us life on top of lifelink. Multiple instances of lifelink on an equipped creature are redundant, which means when a creature with lifelink deals damage, we gain that much life. However, an effect like you see on Loxodon Warhammer will trigger separately from lifelink, which means if the equipped creature has lifelink and Loxodon Warhammer, we gain twice that much life. Moving on, we have 3 auras, Armadillo Cloak, Unflinching Courage, and Spirit Loop. Armadillo Cloak and Unflinching Courage are pretty similar, where they cost 1 generic, 1 green, and 1 white. They give the enchanted creature +2/+2 and trample. However, where their effects differ is that Unflinching Courage gives the enchanted creature lifelink, where Armadillo Cloak states that whenever enchanted creature deals damage, we gain that much life, similar to Loxodon Warhammer. And then there's Spirit Loop, which costs 1 generic, 1 white, and has that same effect of whenever enchanted creature deals damage, we gain that much life. And as an added bonus, whenever Spirit Loop is put into the graveyard from play, we return it to our hand. This will happen when enchanted creature leaves play or if someone destroys Spirit Loop, but that last effect gives us some resilience with this aura. Moving on to the next section, we have attachments and permanents that'll give our creatures some measure of protection. Though we're going to be throwing down our board wipes, there's a fair chance that our opponents are going to do whatever they can to remove our own creatures. So to prevent that, we include these cards to protect our creatures from our opponent's removal effects. This will ensure that we can protect a creature even when it's not our turn, when we lose Anara's effect. So to start off, we have 2 auras, Alpha Authority and Canopy Cover. Each of these costs 1 generic and 1 green, where Alpha Authority gives the enchanted creature hexproof and Canopy Cover just says enchanted creature cannot be the target of spells or abilities our opponents control. Now these also give the enchanted creature some measure of evasion, where Alpha Authority says that the enchanted creature cannot be blocked by more than 1 creature. And Canopy Cover says that the enchanted creature cannot be blocked except by creatures with flying or reach. So it's kind of like giving enchanted creature flying, but not really. Next, we have 3 equipments, Mask of Avacyn, Sanctuary Blade, and Plate Armor. Mask of Avacyn costs 2 generic mana and gives equipped creature +1/+2 and hexproof. Then there's Sanctuary Blade, which is easily one of the most interesting equipments in the deck. This costs 2 generic mana, and when it becomes attached to a creature, we choose a color. That creature gets +2/+0 and has protection from the last chosen color. This gives us the option to change what color we're protecting the creature from each time it's attached to a different creature. So as the game goes on, we can cater this to prevent whatever color we're trying to protect our creatures from. Then we have Plate Armor, which costs 2 generic and 1 white, and it gives the equipped creature +3/+3 and Ward of 1. Then finishing off this section of protection, we have Tyrite Sanctum and Boar Umbra. Tyrite Sanctum is a land that can tap for a colorless mana, but we can also pay 2 generic and tap it to give target legendary creature a god creature type in addition to its other types and put a +1/+1 counter on it. And its last ability, we can pay 4 generic mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to put an indestructible counter on target god. Then we have Boar Umbra, which is an aura that costs 2 generic and 1 green. It gives enchanted creature +3/+3, but it's also a totem armor, which will replace a destroy effect by sacrificing Boar Umbra. Now we're moving on to the last section of attachments, which gives the equipped creature Haste. Now, as a fair warning, once one of these enters play, this will draw the attention of most, if not all of our opponents, because the notion that one of our creatures can enter play, get one of these attached to it, and one-shot our opponents is, well, to state the obvious, very alarming. So please take care and be very strategic as to when you play one of these permanents. So to start off this section, we have, well, you know them, you love them, Swiftfoot Boots, which cost 2 generic and gives the equipped creature hexproof and haste. Then we have Hero's Heirloom, which costs 2 generic mana and gives the equipped creature +2/+1, and if the equipped creature is legendary, it gains trample and haste. Then we have Obsidian Battle Axe, Haunted Cloak, and Sword of Vengeance. Each of these are equipment that costs 3 generic mana. Obsidian Battle Axe gives the equipped creature +2/+1 and haste. Haunted Cloak gives the equipped creature Vigilance, Trample, and haste. And Sword of Vengeance gives the equipped creature +2/+0, First Strike, Vigilance, Trample, and, you guessed it, haste. Before we move on to the section of the deck list with board wipes, let's talk a little bit about non-creature targeted removal. Though it's great and all that we have a lot of things that will enable our winning strategy, we can be sure that our opponents are going to play cards that will enable their own winning strategies. So let's pack a few cards in our own deck to deal with these things. Which brings us to Seal of Cleansing, Seal of Primordium, and Wilt. Seal of Cleansing and Seal of Primordium cost 1 generic and 1 white or 1 green, respectively, and are enchantments that are left in play until we choose to sacrifice them to destroy target artifact or enchantment. This ability can be played at any time, as well as Wilt, which is an instant, that costs 1 generic and 1 green, which can also destroy an artifact or enchantment, but we can also pay 2 generic to discard it and draw a card. Now, each of these three can destroy an artifact or enchantment, but our opponents can also play things that are a little bit more formidable. In that case, simple destroy effects just won't cut it. So to deal with these, we have Crush Contraband, Deglamour, and Forsake the Worldly. Each of these are an instant, with Crush Contraband costing 3 generic and 1 white, and we can choose to exile target artifact, target enchantment, or both. Deglamour, which costs 1 generic and 1 green, doesn't exile an artifact or enchantment, but we get to choose one and its owner shovels it into their library. Although its owner can end up drawing that card later and playing it again, it's important that we get that artifact or enchantment out of play in the first place. Although chances are we're going to be playing this on our opponent's artifact or enchantments, we can also play this on one of our own to protect it from other exile effects and put that card into our library so we can draw it later. Now, Forsake the Worldly, which costs 2 generic and 1 white, will exile target artifact or enchantment, but we can also pay 2 generic mana, discard Forsake the Worldly to draw a card. Now we're going to move on to arguably the most exciting part of our deck list, the board wipes. We have a lot of these, so let's get started. First off, we have Divine Reckoning, which costs 2 generic and 2 white. Each player chooses a creature they control and destroy the rest. We can also cast this from our graveyard for 5 generic and 2 white. Next, we have Shadow the Sky, which costs the same, and each player who controls a creature with power 4 or greater draws a card, then destroy our creatures. Then we have Fumigate, which costs 3 generic and 2 white, destroy our creatures, and we gain 1 life for each creature we destroy this way. Then there's Kurtar's Wrath, which costs 4 generic and 2 white, destroy our creatures, they can't be regenerated. And then upon resolution, if we have 7 or more cards in our graveyard, we get 2 white spirit creature tokens that are 1/1 and have flying. Then we have Phyrexian Rebirth, which has the same mana cost, destroy our creatures, and then we create a horror artifact creature token, where its power and toughness are equal to the amount of creatures destroyed this way. Then we have Rout, which costs 3 generic and 2 white, destroy our creatures, they can't be regenerated. Now we can also pay 2 more to cast this at instant speed, which enables one of our better plays, which is we wait for the end step before our turn to cast this at instant speed, and then right afterwards we begin our turn, untap all of our lands, and cast our commanders and swing. Then we have Fated Retribution, which costs 4 generic and 3 white. It's our only instant, and like Rout, it can be cast at instant speed because, well, it's an instant. This will destroy our creatures and all planeswalkers, and if we cast this during our turn, we scry 2. As mentioned with Rout, we can cast this on the end step before our turn, but most of the time I found that I've cast this during combat as a combat trick. It's a good combat trick, but also getting that scry 2 is an extra bonus. And then moving on, we have another one of my favorite cards in the deck list, which is, well, basically a board wipe on a stick, Novablast Worm, which costs 3 generic, 2 green, and 2 white. It's a 7/7 worm. Whenever it attacks, we destroy all other creatures. If we have Anara in play, we're not worried about this destroy effect and we can protect our own commanders. But it's also an excellent creature to throw all of our auras and equipment onto to swing in for the win. Although this won't count towards the commander damage that we're trying to go for, we can easily build this up to be a formidable attacker. Or we can leave all of our ores and equipment in our commanders and just have this thing swing in for an auxiliary but repetitive board wipe. As the game goes on, our opponents are going to be sure to remove some of our own permanents, most notably our ores and equipment. Although we can just keep drawing more ores and equipment, it isn't that bad of an idea to include cards that can get some of those cards back from the graveyard. Again, not really necessary, so we only included 2 cards that do this. We have Creeping Renaissance and Brilliant Restoration. Both are sorceries where Creeping Renaissance costs 3 generic and 2 green. Upon resolution, we choose a permanent type and we return all cards of that type from our graveyard to our hand. We can also cast this from the graveyard for 5 generic and 2 green mana. Brilliant Restoration, on the other hand, costs 3 generic and 4 white, and instead of bringing those cards to hand, this will return all artifact and enchantment cards from our graveyard to the battlefield. To finish off the deck list, let's talk about the rest of the land base. As mentioned earlier in the video, we have lands that have both the Forest and Plains type, and those are Arctic Treeline, Canopy Vista, and Radiant Grove. Canopy Vista could come into play untapped if we control 2 or more basic lands, but Radiant Grove and Arctic Treeline definitely come into play tapped. Then we have Botanical Plaza, Thriving Grove, and Thriving Heath. Each of these comes into play tapped and can tap for a green or white mana. And as an added bonus, Botanical Plaza, we can also pay 2 generic, 1 white, 1 green, tap it and sacrifice it to draw a card. Then we have the widely used Command Tower, Evolving Wilds, and Terramorphic Expanse. Command Tower comes into play untapped and can tap for either green or white mana. And Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse can be tapped and sacrificed to search up a basic land and put into play tapped. And to finish it all off, we have 10 basic plains and 11 basic forest. Now, if you're a completionist like me, let's talk about what you'll need to finish kitting out your deck. Now, various cards in the deck produce tokens or have certain effects, so these are the tokens that you'll need. Although basic lands are not included in the cost of this deck, if you want to spend a little bit more money, I fully recommend using these card arts for basic lands, not just because they're full art and they also look really cool, but also because Ardenn is from the plane of Zendikar, and what's more apropos than using lands from that set. Now, I'm not leaving Anara out of it, it's just we don't know what plane she's from. However, once we find out which plane she does come from, we'll be sure to include some basic lands that include art from her set. That way we'll make her feel right at home. As for what you can use to sleeve and protect your cards, I went with Dragon Shield and found it most appropriate to choose the art showing Mega Man and Rush. 'Cause I mean, come on, take a look. And if you're in the market for a new deck box, well, let's have a word from our quote-unquote sponsor. Me. That's right, we have our own store where we sell our very own handmade deck boxes. At the time of this video, we have 2 different styles, but our most popular one, by far, are the boxes that use the commonly used top loaders, so you can use that to show off your favorite commander and also protect your commander deck. We also have an Instagram account where we show off some of our favorite cards, our deck boxes, and also do giveaways from time to time. Please check for links in the description, and we hope you like what you see. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about the strategies you can use to win with this deck. To start off, here's a few Whittle pieces of advice. One is using our opponent's creatures as storage for our auras. What we mean by that is, before casting Ardenn, Anara, or both, we can cast some of our auras onto our opponent's creatures. Now, our opponents during the time will be thankful and a little confused, but once we cast Ardenn and put him into play, we'll take all of those auras back and stack them onto Ardenn. If you do that, be sure to thank your opponents before taking them out. For the next Whittle piece of advice, earlier in this video we mentioned during the board wipe section about casting a board wipe right before we untap at the beginning of our turn. Now, of course, it's not a good idea to follow the first Whittle piece of advice and do this as well. This is more appropriate when you just have equipment in play. But again, we can cast a board wipe and clear the board, and then begin our turn, and then play our commanders, and then build them up. Swing for the win. And for the last Whittle piece of advice, let's talk about Sanctuary Blade for a little bit. Now again, Sanctuary Blade gives a protection from a color effect. If you want to use Ardenn's ability on an equipped creature, do not choose the color white. I made that mistake exactly once and it lost me the game. I hope you don't make that same mistake, so I'm here telling you now not to do that. Now another Whittle thing you can do with this is you can attach this to our opponent's creature. This comes in handy if one of our opponents has a formidable creature and maybe some formidable attachments to it. We can use Ardenn's ability to attach Sanctuary Blade to it, name a color of those attachments, and when we name that color, those attachments fall off. This is a weird workaround removal effect, but it can come in handy because chances are our opponents are not going to be able to see that coming. However, we can only pull this off with Ardenn's ability, and it'll eat up the entire resolution, so choose wisely when you use this. Now let's talk about some changes you can make to the deck list to suit different strategies and different budgets. In one of our first games playtesting with the deck, we came across an opponent that uses mind control effects, or theft effects. So if you're worried about running into some effects like that in your playgroup, you can include the cards that you see here: Martial Impetus, Predatory Impetus, Vow of Duty, and Vow of Wildness. Now, chances are you're going to play one of these auras on our opponent's creatures, but if you're facing down a mind control or threaten effect, it's a very good idea to play this on one of our own commanders. That way, if that commander comes under an opponent's control, that opponent cannot attack us with it since we still control one of these auras. Another set of changes you can make is to prevent edict effects. So to help mitigate this, you can change your deck to include auras or equipment that can produce tokens. We already have some of these effects in the deck, either with Living Weapon or whatever have you, but it doesn't hurt to have a few more cards that do the same thing. That way you can be sure that an edict effect will not catch you off guard. So if you want to make those changes to your deck, we have Cartouche of Solidarity, Ancestral Blade, Citizen's Crowbar, Barbed Spike, Fists of Ironwood, Scepter of Celebration, and Squire's Devotion. Now if you think there are other strategies to watch out for or other cards you think will be useful in the deck, we'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. And with that being said, let's move on to changes you can make to the deck to suit your budget. Now if you want to invest a little bit more into your deck, here are cards that you can include in the deck to increase its power. These cards are Bonder's Enclave, Colony Ambush, Sajiri's Shelter, Ondu Inversion, Felidar Umbra, Robe of Stars, Tome of Legends, Shielded by Faith, and Mantle of the Ancients. If you want to go a little bit lighter on your budget, here's a list of cards that you can use to replace certain cards in the deck list to lighten the cost. The cards we'll use are Imperial Plate, Hand of Vecna, Golem Skin Gauntlets, Trepanation Blade, and Slash the Ranks. And that brings us to the conclusion of our very first deck tech video. We hope you found this video to be enjoyable, informative, but most importantly, that you give this deck a try. For those interested, we have a link in the description that will take you to a deck list for this particular commander deck. From there, you can browse the cards, and if you're so interested, you can be taken to several different vendors that can sell you the cards you need, whether it's in paper or Magic Online, but we wholeheartedly endorse that you go to your LGS to purchase the cards that you need. And if you do give this deck a try, we'd love for you to come back and let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Not only will this help us with our engagement, give us some good pointers, but also other players who may want to give this deck a try could learn a thing or two from other players giving this deck a shot. Also, don't forget to check out our store and our Instagram. Now, we are a new channel to the Magic the Gathering scene on YouTube, and we will strive to improve the quality of our videos. So if you have any criticisms or would want to make mention of things you'd want to see in our videos, feel free to leave a comment down below. But with that being said, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell notification, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take care and have a wonderful day.